I'm going to give you a short, brief guide to writing a short essay or paper analysis, like I have required you to do by the end of the course. And here's how it will go. I'll give you the 10 points first, and then I'll show you in the next couple of slides visually how this might work. So let's assume you've found your article and you're fairly confident that you can deconstruct it and explain things about it, or explain a point of view using the economics that you've learned. So what you want to do first is read the paper, read the article, and think about it for at least a day. And you're thinking and working over in your head the sorts of points that you think you can make about it. So that's point one. Take at least a day to think. Sleep on it, because when you sleep, your brain is working on it, even if you're not conscious of it. The second day you work on this, you take a bunch of paper and a pen or a pencil, and you throw down every point or idea or explanation or diagram that you can think of that would be relevant to analyzing the paper. At this point, don't worry about whether you will keep every idea that you come up with. You're just getting the ideas down in writing. And don't worry about any organization at all. And don't worry about connecting the different ideas or anything like that. Just get down as much stuff as you can come up with. And this can take 1 to 2 hours or even more. So allow lots of time to do this. Then when you're sure you've emptied your brain of everything you might say, take these points and now organize the different points that are spread all over the place into coherent groups, coherent blocks of ideas or points that go together. Okay, so you've grouped all the ideas and points into blocks. Then the next thing you do is you take those blocks and you order them in a coherent way. So one block might be really basic and simple and kind of introductory. Another block might depend on that first block. So the second block will come later. So now you have an ordering of blocks of ideas. Then you write up each block as a paragraph. And the first draft of each paragraph will be terrible, usually. Okay, you're just trying to write out a first draft of each block that includes the ideas that belong in the block and makes a sensible single point. Now here's the thing, every block is now a paragraph. Each paragraph has only one big idea. You do not throw multiple competing ideas in the same paragraph. There should be only one idea for one paragraph for one idea. Okay, now here I mean the unifying idea that all the elements in the block sort of fix around. Then each block should begin with a first sentence that is very simple, subject, verb, object, that does nothing else except say what the big idea is, the big idea for that block. Okay, like banks are too big to fail, period. That would be a first sentence in a paragraph that's driving home the point that you believe banks are too big to fail. And the paragraph would explain, what do you mean by too big? Okay, what do you mean by fail? Now, when you write, you're always doing writing that is simple and clear. This is a technical paper. You're not trying to be Hemingway. This is not art. This is not literature, English lit we're doing here. We're trying to communicate ideas in a very simple way, the most simple possible way. One way you don't complicate your writing is by using negatives or by using lots of qualifications. So you don't say stuff like, many people think that in some cases it is not always the case that all banks are too big to fail. No, you don't do that kind of thing. Don't throw in lots of negatives and don't throw qualifications. Just say it straight and don't worry that somebody can nitpick and say, well, there's this case in Iceland where what you said wasn't true. Okay? You just do direct, simple, and don't complicate. Keep it direct. And you cannot be completely comprehensive. It's impossible to write a sentence that nobody can dispute. Okay? You're writing a sentence that is mostly true, mostly correct, mostly right for any kind of reasonable person would be willing to accept that. Finally, the very first block and the very last block, the very first paragraph and the last paragraph, frame the overall thesis, the overall position or point you're making. Banks are too big to fail, or are banks too big to fail? Is this true or is it not true? Okay, so the first block could only be maybe 2 sentences. You just say, this is what I'm going to claim, this is what I'm going to say, and that's it. You don't use the first block to get into it. Similarly, the last block summarizes your big idea, your big point, your position or topic that you've written about. Finally, my final point is, this kind of thing is difficult for most people, and the reason is it's a non-linear process. If you read a book, your natural approach is linear. You begin at the first paragraph, then you go to the second paragraph, then you go to the third, and you reach the conclusion at the very end and you find out who the murderer was. Technical writing is totally not like that at all. It's not linear. You don't sit down and say on day one, okay, I am now going to write the first sentence. In fact, the first sentence of your paper will probably be the last sentence you write, not the first sentence. So this is not natural to approach in a non-linear way. You just have to get past that. You have to get over that. And by using this system, we sort of try to make it a little easier and kind of, step-by-step way to do it. So in the next slide, I'll start talking and showing how this works. I'm going to give you an example of how to write an essay about an article from a business publication. And this example is a little more simple than what you would do, but it will give you the idea of how it can work. So I chose an article from the Wall Street Journal that I just happened to have lying on my table, and it was on the front page, and the article is Central Banks Put Squeeze on Bond Market. Now, as soon as I saw that title, I had a good idea that it would fit within the scope of this course, and that is an advantage that I have, I guess, that I am more used to interpreting articles from the business press, so it's easier for me to spot a good article quickly. But let's get on with it, and I will show you how to do the scheme I explained before. So what we look here is the article talks about central banks putting the squeeze on the bond market. You see there the very first paragraph is a single simple sentence. Now, because this is a journalistic article, they do something that you might not do. They need a hook. They need something to get the reader's interest. So what they do is talk about Christopher Sullivan is worried that he might not be able to get bonds. And the reader is expected to see that and immediately be intrigued, curious. How come that there may not be treasury bonds available? Then the article gives some facts that seem to contradict his story. So that, again, is a journalistic technique. We say this guy's worried, and then the very next paragraph we say, but this is a paradox. This is a surprise because, after all, are there not many trillions in debt securities outstanding? The third paragraph goes further into the perspective of Christopher Sullivan, and you see here the main part of the article in which it gives you the story, and the story essentially is that bonds are scarce because central banks are buying a lot of them. So central banks are buying up US Treasury bonds, and that's why an individual trader might find it hard to get them. Now, at this point, what should happen is the reader from this course should immediately realize this is about demand and supply. There's a demand and a supply, and what's happened here is that there's been a shift to the right in the demand for bonds, and that introduction of demand and supply and a demand and supply diagram would be an example of applying the course material to explain and translate, if you like, what is going on. Now, the Wall Street Journal article typical reader is sophisticated enough they don't need demand and supply explained to them. But you, on the other hand, are doing a translation and interpretation as if you were doing it for somebody without that knowledge, as if we took a random relative of yours who had never studied economics, and especially not money and banking, and you have to translate and explain the article. Hence the demand and supply diagram. So you'd use this demand and supply diagram to show that there's been a shift to the right in the demand curve, which then explains what happens next. As we know, if demand goes up, supply stays the same, price goes up. By now you know that when the price of bonds go up, the yield goes down, and there's a whole discussion there about the yield going down and the consequences for interest rates. And there's much more on the data. There's the graph at the top there. Okay. Toward the end of the article, it talks about portfolios. And here you see the rest of the article. The story on the portfolio is something like this. If you imagine that the private sector needs, and especially private banks, need to hold a portfolio of assets, then if one category of assets is declining because they're being bought by central banks, that means something else has to fill in the gap. And that something else is going to be lower quality bonds or lower quality financial assets. And those lower quality financial assets could be things like mortgage-backed securities. And finally, what the article does is it talks about the damaging, there's a reference at the end, I should say, that this is a damaging thing for the financial system because bonds are necessary to serve as collateral in repo arrangements, repurchase agreement arrangements. Now, we have not done repos yet. So the whole collateral repo thing was not taught at the midpoint of the course. But I'll give you the basic idea, we will get to it later, is that when banks make loans to each other, they don't just make a loan and accept a contract in return. What they always want is some form of collateral. So if Bank A makes a loan to Bank B, Bank A demands some assets that it will keep as a form of insurance or collateral against Bank B being late with its payment or not being able to make its payment. And banks are required to have collateral basically because they're required to be very proper in their dealings with other institutions. So what you have is this problem that for interbank lending to be easy and there to be liquidity in the interbank lending market, and for all of that to work properly and quickly and efficiently, there needs to be a sufficient number of high quality government securities to serve as collateral. And if that high quality collateral stuff is becoming difficult to find, then it's bad for the financial system, and that's why it says at the end that there is a problem for the plumbing of the system. And what you would do is explain all that using diagrams or other ways when you do the debrief and essay on this kind of paper. Now I'm going to get into a little bit of the structure stuff. So look at this. This is my own yellow pad, and I'm showing you how, as I went through the article, I scribbled down the ideas and points that were coming out, the facts, the sort of elements, the points. And I don't worry at this point about organizing them all. I am just trying to get down every bit of kind of material that I can later use. So you see there, I misspelled the word scarce. Treasury bonds scarce. That's what I actually meant to write. And then lots of bonds out there. Central banks accumulating bonds. Why? Question mark. Debt available for buyers, supply and demand. Shut out when you need it. There is more stuff there I didn't mention about Japanese and Swiss and German bonds. Same thing is happening with them. The article talks about Brexit, exit from the European Union, Japan and Europe. Stimulus, question mark. Because part of this story is to explain why the banks are wanting to buy so much government debt. Well, they want to buy it because they want to drive the price up and interest rates down. It's related, the sort of underlying driving thing is this stimulus effort, this stimulus philosophy. And that's something that you would definitely bring out and emphasize as part of illustrating your understanding of the economic backstory, the economic element here. So I talk about, okay, you explain all this, showing that you know about bonds, demand, supply, prices go up, yields go down, and therefore interest rates go down, and so on. There's more about Japan, Bank of Japan, that's what BOJ is, and more stuff about how pension funds and insurance companies hurt because of long-term liabilities. Now, all through this, I'm not worrying about the structure, how I will write it up. Notice, I am not writing one single finished sentence here on my yellow pad. That will be the next stage, or a later stage I should say. Don't go immediately into trying to write sentences. So there's more stuff there. What will happen? Wait a minute. It talks about the money supply in the article. Money supply must be going up. After all, if banks are buying bonds, that means they must be printing money to do it. So there's some story there. And there you see my little drawing of a portfolio. High quality bonds, part A. Mortgage-backed securities, question mark, and other lower value securities is part B. A is going down. B is going up. Therefore, lower quality, plumbing, compromised, throwing down the keywords, key ideas. So now I am going to try to show you in a real-time way kind of how that blocking thing works. So what happens is you take those preliminary facts, a couple of them, those points, and you lump them together and you get a block of ideas, which includes, I'll call it block 1. That's the stuff about there is a shortage and bonds are not so easily available as before, and that's a sort of idea 1. Idea maybe 2 would be that it's central banks that are buying up all these things, and there's the data and explanation that central banks are doing it. And then somewhere around there is number 3, which is why are they doing it? What's going on? And maybe that's where you talk about stimulus. Maybe you talk about stimulus some other way or some other place. But somewhere in there will be the sort of stimulus idea. Another idea that you might put down there is demand and supply. Okay, so that's the demand and supply diagram and the explanation for what's going on there. Maybe number 5, the consequences of demand and supply is there, and that's that prices go up, yields go down, therefore interest rates are going down. Maybe you have another block that gets into all this story about interest rates being low around the world, and just gives more examples that this is a global phenomenon. In fact, that this is a global thing and not just a US thing. Maybe that's block 7. You sort of throw down all the associated points that reference the global nature of this thing. And then 8, maybe that's like you're talking about the shortage of good collateral and portfolios of private institutions are losing good capital. That's that circle thing with A going down and B going up. And then maybe you'd have like a 9, some other block where you throw in the ideas about how that these bonds are collateral and repurchase agreements, repos, and all these things are necessary. So in 9, what you're doing is saying that the significance is not simply along the axis of bond prices and yields and interest rate. There's another even dimension here, that the interlinkages, the systemic and systematic sort of stuff, the structure of the financial system itself depends on having a good supply of high quality government bonds. And since that's shrinking, then you also get a conclusion, not just that interest rates are going to stay low. By the way, there's another idea. I just realized, 11. In this article, it talks about how interest rates are sometimes going negative. You actually earn negative interest, not just staying put, but you're actually losing nominal value if you hold a bond long term. But back to 10, maybe that's the idea of that the economies of the world are being threatened, not just because of stuff with interest rates and printing too much money and all of that, but also because the structure itself, by reducing necessary collateral, this is a damaging thing for the structure of the global economy. And maybe not. I don't know. You want to come up with another block that's like saying you think this is a bad idea. I don't know. You have an opinion. Some kinds of article debriefs, you'll have an idea. So we have all these blocks. You've thrown them down there without worrying about the order. You've grouped ideas that are similar together. So the next stage is you take those blocks and you put them inside, decide the appropriate logical order. And that is not necessarily going to be block 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 is just the order in which the ideas occurred to you. All right, but when you write the article, there's nothing that requires you follow the exact sequence of the article. It could be that you want to do it in a different order. So, maybe you want block 1 here and block 3 here and block 4 here, block 7 there, block 6 there, block 9 there, block 8 there. But however you do it, you want the logical progression to be linear, not necessarily following the chronological pattern in the article. Okay, it could be that what you think is the true conclusion is actually occurring somewhere relatively early in the article, in which case the last block in your sequence is not actually the last points on your yellow pad. So now here what I'm doing is I'm showing the ideas instead of in blocks. I'm showing them sort of explicitly. There you see the things I just talked about. High quality bonds being bought by governments. Why? Stimulus, supply and demand is in play. That's driving down interest rates. Create a supply and demand diagram. What's happening with portfolios? Well, A is going down, B is going up. A is high quality bonds. B is lesser quality financial assets. And there's more stuff here about the bonds being needed by the financial system in their regular transaction world because they use it as collateral, and that's important. And you get the plumbing damaged or compromised if you reduce the necessary high quality collateral to a low level. If you do that, banks will have to start using lower quality collateral, which is can be a problem. And maybe ultimately the very last block, what you'd want to say is something like the fundamental cause of all of this, what's driving this, is the stimulus policy, stimulus philosophy. Keep interest rates as low as possible at all costs. So if you do want to have an opinion, maybe your opinion is, wow, stimulus is not a free lunch. There are problems with having this stimulus continue indefinitely. We're getting into territories where interest rates are not just low, they're actually negative. You actually penalize savers. The person who puts $1,000 in the bank is actually going to lose money. So something like that. You might have some kind of conclusion or opinion or insight, and it is not necessarily the thing that was at the end of the original article. Stimulus is not at the end of the article. Stimulus is talked about in the middle of the article, but actually stimulus is the driver of the whole story. That's what is actually driving the plot, if you like. So maybe that's the sort of conclusion you want to have at the end, something like that. Okay, so you've got the basic idea, the basic framework. I gave you an example, and I'll be sending you more information about this, including how to submit it. Okay, so that covers the quick and dirty 10-point diagrammed example given story of how you can organize yourself to write up an essay. And the main idea, as I said, is not to make you into Hemingway. It's so that at least this helps you kind of get down in a way that works your ideas and organize them in a way that you can write it up so that you do not get stuck in a freeze. That's what we're trying to avoid here. And the overriding principle for anything like this that's technical writing is most times you do not sit down and start writing a sentence as step one. Above all, don't do that. Organize your ideas, put them in a logical structure. Writing is the very last thing you do. And in fact, the first sentence, the last sentence should be simple, maybe even one sentence paragraphs, and they should be the last thing you do, not the first thing you do. Okay? So I hope this helps you get started, and I'll see you next time.